What we have here is the animation rig file. In this example, we have an FK setup and we have a dynamic setup. So what we have essentially is the two sets of curves and the selection sets for the curves as we had in the working hair file. Everything should connect back up. So let's begin the process. So what we want to make sure is that we're selecting the correct growth surface, because again, we want to make sure that we're matching the work file so that all the connections find each other. So what we want to do is create a Yeti node per groom file. Now I'm gonna name it as we had it over in the work file, Kurt base. I'm gonna name it input output. Now that we created the Yeti groom node, we're gonna introduce the groom file that we exported earlier, and the way that we do that is we go into the Yeti node's input output palette, and under input we just have to point the cache file. So we want to navigate to where we exported the groom file. It says, do you want to replace it? This is just a message that comes up, but it's not actually going to replace a file. It's just to confirm that this is the file that we want to use. Rename it Kurt Mullet. And now we need to switch this to cache. And we're seeing something, so let me go ahead and hide the curves. And what we're seeing is the hair. And if we open up the Yeti graph editor, we'll see that all the nodes came back. So let's change the root node, and as I hit the root on the width, nothing's changing because the network is locked to the state that it was in when the groom file was created. So if we go into our hair work file, go into the graph editor. Now we want to make the width the root. So if we go ahead and export the Yeti groom file now, export groom file from selected, go into the WIP file, and let's just version this up and replace the master groom file. So now if we go back into the input output, refresh the file, we see that it's updated. Now what we want to do is enable the override cache with inputs. So if we turn that on, we should see the Yeti graph connections active, and we're not seeing any changes in the hair. So the problem is that in order for the Yeti node to communicate with the scene elements, it needs the selection sets. Since the file has the selection sets that we need, we just need to add those selection sets to the Yeti node. We just need to use the same ones and match what we used in the hair file. And here we go. So now we should see something happen. So let's try this again. And here we go. Now we have successfully introduced the Yeti network into a new scene file. So now if we were to say rotate the head and see what happens, and so that shouldn't be happening. So another step that we need to make sure we duplicate here is the use of texture references and rest positions. So let's select one of them and go into the attribute editor, and this file's guides do not have the rest position information, so let's reset the shape of the curves. We want to select the guide sets. Go Yeti, save guide rest position. So now if we select one of the curves, go into the extras attribute, we should see we have this information here. To test this, we can just remove it, remove guide rest position. Now save guide rest position. So we got that. Now we want to make sure that the growth geo has a texture reference. The way that Yeti works is it's projecting the growth points on the surface. So we want to lock the position of these points on the mesh itself. So the way that you do that is set the menu context to rendering, select the mesh, and under texturing, create texture reference. Now we can group it under here and hide it. So now if we were to move this again, it should stick, and it does. So now we can move the growth geo in space. Let's try the controls, and the controls are working. We want to make sure that the rest of the pieces come along as well. So let's increase their display information. So it looks like the face hair decided to stay behind. So let's see what's going on. If we go into the input folder, so we don't have the override cache inputs enabled. So the reason why it's staying behind is it's a cache file. Without any active connections, it's going to keep the shape and position that it was in when the groom file was created. So as with the mullet, we want to enable the override cache with inputs. And what this is doing is it's activating the input to the geometry, so it's able to update along with the geometry's position. So we have to do the same for the other Yeti nodes. And one last thing that we need to do is apply the shaders to the new Yeti nodes. So let's find these hair, the beard, eyebrows, and eyelashes. So we need to reapply the hair shaders to the new Yeti nodes. Now one thing that you might notice is that the scene file does get a little bit sluggish with the active connection, so be mindful of leaving the file saved with the input on. We do a quick render test to make sure that everything's working. Okay, so it is rendering. However, we did move it out of place. That's why it's not centered, and it's looking a little thin. We know how to fix that. We have to select the Yeti nodes and update the render density. And render, and here we go. And it's rendering, it's moving, it's looking good. So we're going to cover how to export approved animation as an Alembic file for use in rendering.